This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Asana, the revolutionary platform to manage all your projects more easily and effectively. For your free 30-day trial, visit asana.com/BeanCast today. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Episode 528, An Admirable Admiral. For Monday, January 21st, 2019, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. Gillette caused a bit of a stir this week because of a commercial that took on toxic masculinity. But the debate has sparked all kinds of conversation about how men are being portrayed in advertising. Is it time for some serious introspection? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, updating our privacy for the IoT age, whether no big CES news can work to tech's advantage, whether the gig economy is being undermined, plus this week's AdFail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and president of Future Fourth, Mr. Dave Delaney. Dave, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Bob. It's great to be here.
Love having you on the program. Now, also with us, we have the executive creative director for CBD maker Charlotte's Web, Mr. Colin Glaum. Colin, hi, how are you?
I'm great, man. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. And finally, we once again welcome back the Admirable of consultancy, the HMS Beagle, author, speaker, Mr. Joseph Jaffe. You know, I put it in my head that I was going to say Admirable, and I did.
I'm changing my official title to the Admirable Admiral. And by the way, CBD stands for Central Business District, right? That's what I always learned in economics. No?
Exactly.
I think it's code. It's code for, basically medicine.
I know what it means.
Medicinals, that's what we're talking about. Well, let's get right into the topic. And first up, the recent firestorm over the Gillette ad that took on toxic masculinity has opened up a can of worms on so many fronts. There are so many ways that we can take this particular topic. I mean, people are out there saying it's diminishing masculinity as a whole. They're burning razors. They're getting all in the face of people who are saying that this is some kind of woke ad, and they're saying this is wrong and it's hurting men. And then you have the other angle where people are saying it's more about opportunism and not being genuine, because this is a brand that has traditionally not been very woke in the way that they treat women and the way that they portray men. Not to mention, is this all just a drop in the bucket in addressing how men are being portrayed in ads as a whole? Because this is not just isolated to one razor ad. This is something that is affecting lots of different advertisements out there. So, Joe, I've set this up in so many different ways that you can take this. I'm just going to let you roll with this right off the bat. What do you think about this ad? What do you think about the whole issue of toxic masculinity in advertising? And also, what do you think about the way men are being portrayed in ads as a whole? Your thoughts?
So, look, if I had to summarize this in a tweet-sized amount of characters, I would probably say there is nothing wrong with the message. There is something wrong with the messenger. And, sorry, Gillette, but you are no Dove. This just isn't authentic. Again, the message is pure. The message is a good one. But coming from Gillette, coming from a brand that built its entire base being the best a man can get, using overpaying celebrities, The only clean one, the only squeaky clean one being Roger Federer, but this is a brand that invested in people like Ray Rice or Tiger Woods as well. I mean, for me, and again, this can be taken in so many directions.
Oh, but
This is a
can a company change though? I mean, I hear the arguments out there that they've been a company that has not been particularly aware in the past about the toxic masculine image that they were portraying, and now they're taking a different tack. They're looking at masculinity and they're seeing that masculinity has changed in the culture, and then it's been damaging people for way too long. The way that they've been portraying the way a man should be, the best a man could be, and they're trying to come up with a different solution. I mean, isn't that acceptable? Isn't that something that's a powerful message saying a company can change its attitude?
It was a BeanCast several months, maybe about a year ago, when I heard Saul Colt in particular talking about McDonald's turning their golden arches from an M into a W. Hashtag droopy boobs was coined, and Saul said something which I thought was very profound. He said, why not take the money that they spent to actually physically turn some of their logos around and donate it to Planned Parenthood? So now in this case, you've got Gillette donating or announcing that they're going to donate $1 million a year for 3 years towards, I guess, helping males become more clueless. And we do need help, let's be clear. But they're spending $5 million and countless knows how much in production and agency fees to tell us that they're spending $1 million or donating or investing $1 million. It just doesn't ring true to me. I mean, I would say this, first of all, and I'm not meaning to be overly harsh or cynical, even though I'm coming across as overly harsh and cynical. But this is a commercial that features all males. So you've got a bunch of males being paid. I wonder how many females they have in their boardroom. I wonder how many sissies, as they call them in the commercial, they have on the executive board. I wonder whether they had a female director actually shooting this commercial. That's how you walk the talk. To talk a message of diversity, you must walk it in return.
But let me stop you there, because I was with you 100% about the fact that they could have spent the money better. I mean, the point that Saul made on the show some months back it still holds true. It's just a cheap stunt. It could have been more of a commitment by the company to fund those types of initiatives. That could have been a much more broader, more realistic story. But I want to back off this talk about this ad being about diversity, because it's not about diversity. It's about men. This is about men. It's about men looking introspectively at themselves and saying, are we the best that we can be? It's not about women. It's not about whether or not women feel good about this ad. This is a harsh look at men and saying we are not being the best that we can be. From a message standpoint, I think it's fine to have men come to that conclusion on their own and come up with this type of message.
I was just going to say, I like how the brand itself is one that is all about men looking in a mirror. Because if you use Gillette products, you're looking in a mirror probably when you shave, right?
Right.
So, and so the idea of men sort of, being sort of actually looking at themselves and thinking of, maybe considering the messaging of the ad. I mean, Mitch Joel mentioned it. I think it was on LinkedIn. He posted something about, not so much about the topic or even the content within the ad, but more about the point that it's an ad. And that and the purpose of advertising is to get people talking about the brand, and everyone's talking about the brand now, right? So it worked.
Yeah.
As far as the messaging goes, I saw it. I saw the ad. I didn't know who it was for initially, and it resonated with me. I agree with sort of the stance on it. And then at the end, it's Gillette, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I could see that. But it didn't really irk me,
I feel like there's so many principles that you could draw out of this that are relevant to the entire conversation. I guess the first of which is, I'll start with, you need to understand why you're doing something. And Gillette has forever just thought about what they produce. All they produce is blades. They produce the best blades. They make your face look great, but they've never understood why they needed to do that. And this is the first stance that they've taken on why they do what they do. And I think it's brilliant the way that they did it. Now, I will tell you that I actually I went down the rabbit hole in this one and got really invested because I thought this kind of announcement by a company like Gillette, I used to have them as a client when I worked at BBDO. I saw such a different face of them that I was so happy to see them try and do this. But to the earlier point, when you look into their boardroom, because I actually posted on YouTube, and the immediate rebuttal was, look at their executive leadership, and there is zero diversity, like zero. And to your Bob, I understand your point completely about it not being about women or about diversity, but it's about humanity. And the idea that if you want to be a guy in this day and age, you have to be able to relate to more than just other dudes. And the ability for this company to walk the walk and be able to actually say, hey, you know what, this isn't an all boys club. We're going to bring women, people of color, whatever kind of diversity you're thinking of, into that C-suite. That's the step that they need to make in order for this thing to really resonate.
And I want to be clear here too, because I usually do take these devil's advocate positions. I am not a fan of this ad, and it's not for the reasons that it's, addressing masculinity in a wrong way or something like that. I mean, it's just like, overall, I'm fine with the message. It's kind of vanilla. It's kind of semi-interesting, but it's not all that amazing what's going on with it. I'm more of this standpoint of like what Bob Hoffman said on his blog post. He sends out a newsletter on a weekly basis, and Bob took him to task just for not being genuine. It's just like for being opportunistic, and that's what bothers me most about this advertisement is that I don't think that it is a genuine commitment. I don't think that they've put any money behind what they're saying, any kind of real money, any kind of real muscle behind what they're saying. It's more about opportunism and saying, look, we can do Me Too as well. And it's not the same thing. But the most interesting thing that's come out on all this conversation swirling around this particular advertisement is the question about whether or not men are being portrayed well in advertising today. And I don't think it's just about toxic masculinity. I think a lot of this backlash over the message that was contained in this ad is the neutering of men in other advertisements, the ways that men are always the bumbling idiots. They don't know how to do things, that somehow the woman in the household always holds all the strings and knows everything that's going on and is much more competent than the man. Those types of situations are making men feel less than throughout the entire spectrum of advertising. And so when something like this comes along, it gets amplified. People are more irritated by it. And I think that, there's different ways that men are being portrayed in advertising, both as toxic males and as neutered males, that are not being accurate in terms of portraying the strong man who's also very woke and able to do things without having to diminish other people or diminish other women.
I mean, it's crazy because I think we're all longing to return to the days of farting donkeys. I think it was Bud Light, and probably if we did go back to that, which is portraying mules in a demeaning or an insulting way, there'd probably be someone up in arms. There'd be someone up in arms about how we're portraying poor old donkeys. So, look, I mean, I think if we take a step back, advertising is already in enough trouble. And now, without the ability to generalize and stereotype and apply humor, because that's really where a lot of it came from and was put into or communicated through, where does advertising go from here in terms of trying to be funny, a little self-deprecating, a little irreverent? I mean, I would hate to be a creative director because it is a proverbial minefield.
Well, people have been saying for some time it's the worst time in history to be a comic. I mean, it's really just a terrible time for anybody to do any kind of comedy because it's going to offend somebody. I mean, the whole
It's because it's
idea.
being recorded.
Well, no, but the whole idea of comedy is to skirt that line and be offensive to somebody. I mean, let's face it, even
Yep.
when you're doing something completely vanilla about something your father did to you when you were a kid, you're still diminishing your father in that particular line. So comedy is really, really tough right now. And that's a particularly hard thing to get around. I mean, it's just like we're seeing such vanilla, whitewashed, dull advertising coming out. And every time someone does something a little bit edgy, this is what happens. You do something a little bit edgy and controversy comes out out the seams. You know, it's just crazy.
I would like to see more people hold Gillette accountable to, to this ad over the long term, and by having enough people online to be able to follow who's in the boardroom and to track, how much diversity, or how many women, or how much diversity they have in their C-suite would be an interesting thing. And hopefully now, with the ability for people to be able to research that pretty easily and then spread that information online, I'm hoping to be able for Gillette to be continually held accountable to that, or held to this, so that these, the fact that they're saying, that women need more opportunities and things like that, some of what I've heard about, I would love to see that, reported on more. So we'll see what happens with it. It'd be interesting to see.
That to me is the most important point, because by them taking this even initial step, even if it's just $3 million, which is less than the media buy that they spent on the ad itself, at least they're moving in the right direction. And the article that I read from their corporate social responsibility person, like really, he's trying to drive change within an organization that it cannot be easy to drive change in. So for that reason alone, I applaud the effort, and I would hope that they can continue down this path, because that's exactly what being a creative director is these days. It's not creating the funny thing that gives you attention for 15 seconds. It's about making change that sets the company up for future success. And the only way to do that is to really affect like real change into an organization that's going to show that you are the kind of value-based organization that people are going to want to buy in the future. Because it has to be about the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? It can't be about the what. And I'm paraphrasing Simon Sinek, but that's exactly what it is.
No, I completely agree with you. What I would say, though, is that, this is a company dealing with an unprecedented amount of competition from the likes of the Dollar Shaves and the Harrys of the world. And what I would like to have seen, just to build on top of what you said, is Gillette saying, we did this. We were guilty. We were the ones who idealized and portrayed these overpaid, misogynistic celebrities who didn't exactly live their lives according to a code that we would have liked to have been associated with our brand. We're going to change as well. And I think that's the missing link for me, to see a company being able to say, mea culpa, this is a new day. This is a new chapter. This is a new Gillette, and we're going to walk our talk. And that's where this comes across as nothing more than a PR stunt. Let's be honest, that money they're donating to charity, that's a tax write-off as well. So that's where, forget about what we say on a panel on a Sunday evening. If you just go and go to their YouTube channel, and you will see an overwhelming amount of thumbs downs and negative comments compared to the positive sentiment. And that tells you everything about how people see right through them and see them for who they are.
But again,
it's way harder to burn razors than it is shoes. So I think long term it'll be okay for them.
Well, I think Colin's point is the one that needs to be held on to here. This point about accountability. I mean, we can feed into the outrage, the manufactured social media outrage, or we can say, okay, Gillette, this is who you want to be as a company. We're going to remember this, and we need to hold them accountable in terms of the way that they communicate to us from now on. Because if they do start communicating to us in the same old ways because market share slipped and they need to go back to it, Well, that's a time to hold them accountable by not buying their product. I mean, if you really believe in what they're saying and you think that it's a good thing, whether or not you believe they believe it or not, it's just like hold them accountable and make sure it happens. Well, we're going to talk.
But Joe's point. Hold on, before you finish that statement. Joe's point is very well taken, because the real success would have been here to own up to their part in it. Because if you look at some of the companies like a Domino's or it wasn't Lincoln, maybe it was Chrysler. When they apologized after their major failings, those stock prices soared. So it wasn't just about like, hey, we screwed up on our product, or we screwed up on the way that we presented ourselves, or we screwed up in the way that we positioned ourselves in the market. They actually took accountability for who they were as a company. And when they did that, everyone kind of came back around. I think at least in America, you owning your mistake gives you an opportunity to make it good. And people are more than willing to jump on those bandwagons. And I think, to Joe's point, it would have been awesome for them to actually own up to some of it. I think I've lowered my expectations to say, even you taking that first positive step I'm going to give you positive reinforcement, because you're at least moving in the right direction.
Well, we're going to move next on to privacy standards in the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things being the hot topic at CES this year, as so many devices are coming out. But the question of privacy is becoming more and more of an issue, and whether or not brands are putting themselves at risk by taking advantage of all this new rich data that we're getting. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor for this evening, Asana. And they have a question for you, a really simple question. How do you manage your products? I'm sorry, that's not the question they're asking. They're asking, how do you manage your projects? Boy, I got to get my words right here. How do you manage your projects? I mean, how do you do things like avoid the hassles of duplicating effort? How do you know which guy's done what? How do you know whether or not you're doing something that someone did 2 days ago? And if you're managing all this, how do you know what everyone has done so far? How do you know how far you're going, how fast you're going, whether or not you're going to hit your deadlines? I first was introduced to the Asana platform when I was working with a company called 16 Zeros. They were using it throughout their IT department to try to get everybody in line in terms of the development of the core product. And they started to use it in the communication portion of the business, which is where I was helping them out. And I fell in love with this platform. It was so easy to use. You basically set up a task list. You set it up either by a list fashion or via calendar. It's really super visual. You can figure out where all the dates fall against each other and who's doing what, when, and what resources need to be applied to which project. And then as a manager, it was so easy to just look at everything in one big sweeping view and see where things are at any given point. But the thing that got me most about Asana and made me a true believer of this particular platform was the apps that they created. And I'm not alone in my love of this particular service. I mean, Asana is used by companies like Overstock, and they use it to manage all their partner relationships. And you got to imagine a company like Overstock, with as many partner relationships that they have, must be hundreds of thousands. They really depend upon Asana to make sure that everybody is on task in managing these very important relationships for the company. Tribeca Film Festival uses them to manage all their events. And you got to imagine putting on an event as complicated as the Tribeca Film Festival requires some kind of robust platform that allows you to keep on top of every single detail without any kind of trouble that's going to cause more problems down the line. Now, more than 1 million organizations in 195 countries across the world use Asana, and they're reporting all kinds of amazing stats. Like, two of my favorites are that 45% more productivity from teams using Asana. Companies that are using it are reporting 45% more productivity, and 80% of customers say Asana increased team accountability, which is a super important thing when you're trying to do a project, because everybody is accountable for what they are assigned to do. Now, I want you to give this a try, and I've got this great opportunity for you to do so. I want you to give your marketing team everything they need to work more productively and turn the big ideas into marketing programs, and then turn those marketing programs into results that grow your business. All you have to do is go to asana.com/BeanCast, and they are going to give you Asana free for 30 days. That's Asana, ASANA.com/BeanCast for your free 30-day trial. No risk, no obligation. Asana, I hope I've portrayed to you how important I think this platform is and how much I love it, and I think you're going to love it as well. And we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, as connected devices begin to pile up in our homes, and we're talking about all kinds of connected devices, not just those Echo devices or the phones, we're talking about light bulbs and toasters and refrigerators and washing machines. As they start to pile up in the home, the opportunities for marketers to understand and anticipate consumer needs is becoming almost godlike. We have the ability to predict things that we never could before. And it's not just because your Echo is listening in. It's your connected lock that's on your front door that can help infer traffic patterns based on when you get home, or your connected scale that can infer diet and exercise patterns. The question is, Dave, when it all comes down to it, we have all this rich data, but how much data is too much data? And how do we keep from getting into the creepy territory where we're just knowing way too much about our clients and causing them to be scared about the fact that we're presenting products before they even realize that they were asking for it?
And it happens. It's amazing. It's shocking. You know, my wife and I were driving recently, and we used to have a Subaru, and we saw a new Subaru, and we started talking about the Subaru. Like, wow, that's a nice Subaru. Maybe our next car should be a Subaru. And we mentioned it several times. And yeah, I mean, I saw it myself firsthand. You know, got home and on Instagram started seeing ads on Instagram for the new Subaru.
What's your first concern about that? Do you feel like your device was listening?
Yeah, I do. But my biggest concern with Internet of Things, you know, internet connected devices, goes even beyond the whole data side, and it's more about these devices bringing down the internet, which has happened. You know, in I think it was 2016, there was a denial of service attack that brought down the East Coast in the United States, lost access to the internet. Do you guys remember that?
I remember, and it was caused by a lot of Internet of Things devices that had poor security and were able to be hacked and provided denial of service attack across the Eastern Seaboard.
Yeah. So last year there was 8.4 billion of these things. So that's a lot of things, internet connected to the internet, that people are not, and most customers, most users of these don't realize or can't be bothered updating the firmware on them. So they become problematic this way because hackers can tap into them, and then your refrigerator can take down the internet. So that really freaks me out. And so for me personally, I don't use too many of these devices. Also because, you know, I don't need my fridge telling Amazon to ship me more milk. You know, like I can get up, I can go to the store. Like it's not that big a deal to me personally as a consumer. But as far as the data goes, yeah, it is pretty shocking, and it is pretty fascinating to see how this works. I mean, you know, I certainly have privacy concerns. You know, I obviously don't want these devices listening into every intimate conversation I have with my wife or anything else for that matter. And so, you know, we make it a habit at my home to mute the device, the smart speakers, you know, just hit the mute button when we're not actually using them. So they're always muted. But it is concerning. It's definitely concerning.
Here's the thing about that I think a lot of people misunderstand how Internet of Things works, and how the data that we're collecting is so distributed that we can't even know when we're giving Google or when we're giving Amazon or we're giving Apple or any of these companies the clues that they need to know what we're going to do next. Because you are sitting there talking about a Subaru with your wife, and you have the impression that some device was listening in, but that's not what's happening. No hacker out there has been able to find that code in these devices. They're not actually listening and using that data directly or interpreting that data. What they're doing is using all the other data points from all the other connected devices, like the fact that you drive past that Subaru dealership one or too many times that week, you know, 2, 3, 4 times. I mean, they're saying they're inferring things that we can't even begin to understand, but by simple clues. I mean, That's where it gets really scary, because it's not a direct line from my refrigerator tells me I need more milk, and then I get
Mhm.
more milk delivered. It's the fact that my lock is telling the person that I get home at 6 every day. So that's going to mean that I'm taking a certain route because they also know I work at this other location in the city.
Well,
Um,
same can be said for Uber as well, or any sort of ride sharing company, right? So
right.
they can track if you use it frequently, depending, but they can track when you go out to the pub every Friday night after work, and then one night you don't go directly home, you go elsewhere, and then you go home in the morning. It's like, okay, we know we know where you've been.
I was thinking of one thing that I noticed, and generally I like it, and I like it a lot. Which is when I get in my car, I think it would obviously have to be Apple Maps because it's native into the iPhone. Will almost give me directions to the place that it thinks that I'm going to.
Mm.
And typically, based on my patterns, I am going there. So when I get in the car at a certain time, it will say, 14 minutes to home, coming from the office, and I like that, and it's making my life a little bit easier, and it's
Yeah.
shortcutting. But what happens when it actually goes horribly wrong,
Mm.
and in somebody's life where maybe they're going somewhere that they shouldn't be, and suddenly that's jumping on their phone. I think here's the point that I want to make, which is, and I think kind of Dave was kind of alluding to it, which is, thanks very much. I'm able to buy more milk when I need to. I don't need you telling me, alerting me to the fact that milk is low. Um, the issue here is that many of these connected devices and many of these manufacturers, they're still kind of looking at it from from a how to sell you more stuff lens. They really are looking at it from a corporate centric standpoint rather than a customer centric standpoint. I don't believe for a second that if you had to go and poll the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of consumers, that they would be asking for these things. And no, this isn't the Henry Ford quote. If I'd asked consumers my customers what they would have wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. This
Mm.
isn't Apple as well being able to infer or think about things like AirPods. This is just your scores and myriads of clueless companies just trying to figure out how to make a fast buck. And because they're doing that, they're kind of collectively, this isn't the rising tide that floats all boats. This is the lowering tide that basically strands all boats.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one. I mean, it's just like there's so much about the Internet of Things that's interesting and dynamic and so filled with promise in terms of service, and yet people use
Mm.
it to the lowest common denominator every single time. And my question for the panel here is, if are we fighting, are we going upstream when we shouldn't be swimming upstream? In other words, we're saying that this is a rich data set that can be used to service the client better and make them happier. But the results are results. If targeting someone more effectively and predictively gets them to buy products, that satisfies the minimum rung of marketing and advertising. So, are we fighting
Yeah.
against something that just needs to happen, no matter what, whether we think it's a good thing or a bad thing? It's going to happen. So, what we need to do is manage that as elegantly as possible without getting into the mud too much.
Like personally, I want to be served ads for things that are relevant to me. Like I want to see ads for things that are specific. I mean, I was watching the Rory Scovel special on Netflix. By the way, if you haven't seen his special, his comedy is hilarious. And I was on Instagram again, and suddenly an ad for Rory Scovel pops up. Now I can't say with certainty. I probably mentioned Rory Scovel on Facebook too. But the point is that I saw an ad that he was coming to Nashville, where I live, and so straight away I bought tickets, and my wife and I had a great night out. So it paid off that way. I mean, I understand, and I'm not downplaying privacy concerns because there are definitely reasons and good reasons to be concerned. But at the same time, in order to use these services, a lot of the time I'm going to be served ads, and the better
And
the
for
ads
every
are
and if
for
for,
me, the better it is for the advertiser as well.
And for every single ad that is well targeted and exciting for you that gets you to buy is going to be served to somebody else who's going to feel betrayed by it and feel like it's invasive. There's no way to get around it when you're advertising, whether or not you're trying to create a better, richer customer experience, or you're just trying to schlock your latest, shill your latest project. It's just like you're going to piss off like 70% of the people, 50% of the people, 30% of the people, whatever, and the rest of them are going to love it. So, and the rest of them are paying the bills. So, does it matter how much you make people frightened by knowing too much about them?
I find it interesting now because a lot of the times, these ads have been served to us based on the free services we were using, right? So we're using these free services and we're paying with our privacy, and we've talked about that many times. But what's interesting now is that we're actually buying consumer goods, and those goods are connected to the internet. And now, so we're like, but we're paying cheaper prices. There was an article recently, and I'll have to send you a link, but it was about smart TVs and how the prices of smart TVs are so low now. And the reason why is because they're tracking
you, right?
Everything you're consuming.
I saw the same article. That's why TVs are so cheap, is because they're sending all this data back to the manufacturer, and they're selling that data for a profit.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk next about the lack of big CES stories and whether or not that's a big problem. CES, the big consumer electronics show in Vegas, is cyclical. Everybody who's been there knows it. Some years you got the hot new VR goggles, and it's being introduced to massive fanfare and lots of press attention about this is the age of virtual reality. Other years we get the 900,000th, Bluetooth headset iteration that's as boring as can be. But some argue that every year the show takes an accurate pulse of the state of the industry, and that the marketing work that marketing as a whole needs to relinquish its obsession with world-shaking announcements in favor of communicating the importance of through trends being revealed. That there's a subtext of stories going on, even on a down year like this year, where there's no big, huge announcements that are earth-shaking, and yet every device is starting to integrate some kind of voice recognition system, and it's starting to get into a world where artificial augmented reality is playing more and more of a role in devices, and how televisions and computers are becoming more connected. And it's just like there's a through line that's really exciting. And what I'm asking here, Colin, is what are your thoughts about this? Is the marketing department within the average tech company, tech giant, not doing a good enough job of telling the through line story in favor of trying to hype up products that are not all that exciting for this particular year? Colin?
Sorry, I had you on mute. There's two things afoot. One is the conversation around whether or not companies, these tech giants, want to disclose the direction that they're headed, because if you don't have the actual product ready to reveal, do you want to at least let your competition know, and give them an opportunity to fast adapt to the strategy that you're going to be pursuing? But I think there's another story and this is just a sidebar. It's actually a conversation I was having the other night with a friend of mine. Things like technology and innovation and financial markets, I believe that they're all at their healthiest when they follow more natural cycles. If we're expecting them to grow at 30% year over year, and that something artificial is inflating that. If we're going to insist that, whether you're a consumer or you're part of a publicly held company, that these changes need to happen at these absurd rates, I think you're just creating a recipe for disaster. So I'm actually fine. If in reference to CES, to get back to that we're in a lull right now. I don't really mind that. The world can't be conditioned to expect world-changing ideas every 6 months, because if that's the case, we're automatically creating planned obsolescence for like 2/3 of our society.
But that also brings up the point I was trying to make here. I mean, it's just like if we're considering this a down year, why does it have to be a down year? Why can't it be the big news is the fact that this iteration that we're putting out is going to further along this bigger story, this bigger multi-year story, and that's the big thing to push, not the products as individual products, but the suite of products and what they're doing in terms of moving the entire industry forward. I think that iteration is being downplayed to the detriment of the tech industry. That if we talked about iteration with more glowing terms, we wouldn't have to wait for that next big, huge tech announcement of the hot new device that everybody wants. You know, it would be more.
Yeah, but Apple screwed that up years ago. Like iterations from the leading tech giant are viewed as ho-hum now. And so if you're a Microsoft or if you're Motorola or whoever else out there is trying to release something, you're just not. You have to have world-changing ideas for that news cycle to get excited about it. And I'm totally in agreement that it's going to be a down year or down 3 years or whatever it might be, but no one's going to reveal their 5-year plan to get into automated driving. If you're Apple or whatever, they're not gonna show you that. That you have to infer that from the fact that they've hired 300 people from Detroit in the automotive space and moved them all to Cupertino. Like that's the kind of thing you have to understand.
I think there's a lot of opportunity at CES to just capitalize on the buzz from CES for your brand. So many moons ago, I ran content marketing, social media for a consumer electronics company, and we exhibited at CES every year. So I've done 4 or 5 years at CES and probably lost a year of my life because of it. It's a long week, folks. But my point to that was that what we did was we restored a 1972 VW bus, and then we drove it. We did a 6-day road trip, 2,500 miles from Nashville to Vegas. We parked the bus in the booth, and this VW bus became part of our booth. And so there was all these booths with like Lamborghinis and fancy new cars and stuff. And we had this old 72 VW bus, and people were flocking to our booth to meet with us, to pose for photos. And of course, we would show them the new products and products that we had come up with for that year. And Griffin, the company, had been rebranding, or was a rebrand, and we were revealing that then too. So there's some good ways that you can capitalize on exhibiting and being a part of CES without having to release like tons of brand new, like earth-shattering new products, because it's just not going to happen every year. So I just think maybe some brands are lacking creativity, but I think we knocked it out of the park that year, and it was a pretty amazing thing. I mean, 6 days on the road with your colleagues in a VW bus, fun.
And look, I would add a couple things. One is, if you look at CES as a brand, it was almost done for. It was almost extinct in a sense, and it was really about consumer electronics, and it was the big companies like the Panasonics and the Samsungs of the world that would come in, and each screen got bigger and it got thinner, and then it started to curve, and then it was 3D, and what a load of crap that was. And then kind of the lull was maybe filled in by many of the automotive companies all getting excited about connected cars. But you've actually seen CES reinvent itself. And much like South by Southwest continues to evolve. You ask the question from a marketing standpoint, it's not really a place you're going to go to, and you probably don't even need to set foot on the floor to benefit from CES. It's about the meetings and the networking and the parties, and quite frankly, even when we're talking to clients, what are the tentpole events that a marketer should think about attending? Well, I guess in January, it's going to be CES. In March, it should be South by Southwest. Probably if you're in the mobile space, clearly in February, Mobile World Congress. Cannes in June. That's another brand or another event that has to constantly be thinking about iterating and evolving and staying relevant as well. And so for me, again, it's sure if you went to, I don't know, the South convention hall, you'd see 58,000 rip-offs of AirPods, and 25 billion Bluetooth type of drones or something like that. But I don't think anyone's going to see that anymore.
No, agreed wholeheartedly. Well, we're running out of time. I want to move on to the last topic. An ad campaign from Fiverr celebrating the gig economy is catching some heat, mainly because the company has been often accused of having a model that devalued work. Basically, artists, designers, writers get together, they pitch against each other for one client's project, and the winner is chosen, and only the winner gets paid. But considering the success of the platform as a whole, though, Joe, what does this mean for the future of the gig economy and gig employment? Is the ascendancy of companies like Fiverr actually subverting the ability of people to be in a gig economy and make a living?
To answer this question, and I will caveat it by saying I haven't done investigative reporting to the degree to uncover or unearth or really dissect what they pay and how they pay, and ultimately how ethical their standards are and their compensation schemes. I would say from a business model standpoint and from a revenue stream standpoint, I love it. I love Fiverr. I used Fiverr for my book, for my new book. I used Design Crowd to actually design the cover of the book. I felt very strongly that I wanted to use these resources. I have to tell you that for the most part, it's a great deal. It's a great deal for me as a customer, just like it's a great deal for me as a customer to use Uber. What we have to do is we have to kind of take a step back, all of us, and think about whether whether it's an Uber driver or a designer on Fiverr or a designer on Design Crowd, how much money are they making? But it's a free market economy, and ultimately you can choose to join or not. You can choose to provide or not. And so I'm going to come to their defense, provided they aren't in fact running their business unethically or in a suspect way. And the commercial that was that got a lot of flack. Again, this comes back to the very first topic as well. How sensitive are we? How politically correct have we become? So politically correct that to a fault, where I think where every time we show a minority or a constituency in a inferior or a subservient position, and in this case we're talking about supply, right? We're talking about working for someone else, or we're showing the client continuously as a white male. Are we being oversensitive? Or in the case of Fiverr, in this case, maybe they were just a little clueless. Maybe they should have just been slightly smarter to have not had to kind of create that stereotype of who the typical client is and who the typical provider or vendor is.
Let me be clear here. I don't have any complaints against Fiverr whatsoever. I mean, it's just like in terms of like the ad itself, it's a fine ad, and the way that they went about communicating, it's great, and the fact that their platform is successful, more power to them. But what it's coming down to is it's so successful. Platforms like Fiverr are so successful at funneling business into the design community, into the workers, the giggers who are out there. I mean, Uber is the same thing. Uber is allowing a whole gig economy to be created around their app. But in the process, are they making it so that everybody can make enough money to survive, or are they taking all the air out of the room and very few people will be able to survive in this gig economy of the future? And it's basically going to be the people who are the go-getters and the ones who are more dedicated toward going for that. Maybe it's just the most talented will survive and the least talented won't. I mean, it seems like that's the future of the gig economy, that there is no room for the middle anymore. It's got to be the top, the best. And that doesn't sound like a bad thing in theory, but it is a bad thing when you're talking about everybody else who can't make any money anymore.
Yeah, I think it's your responsibility. Like if you're, not you, but like if you own a big agency, then to hire local talent and try to support your community by working with local graphic artists or web designers or what have you. Like if you have the budget If you're an individual like you, Joe, who wants to outsource the design of your cover of your book, well, that's you yourself as an individual trying to do that, and that's where Fiverr comes in pretty handy. I mean, I've used Fiverr myself. I'm sort of a solopreneur as well, so in my case, so using Fiverr is kind of a no-brainer for me. My only beef with Fiverr is that it's called Fiverr, and every job says 20, and then when you talk to the person, they're like, "We'll do it for 60," and it's like, wait a minute, I thought this was Fiverr.
Right.
I think just to weigh in here, my take on this on the creative side of things is that it's just a dumbing down of the real skills, and anyone who can throw in a little bit of talent that exceeds the person who's asking is going to be considered transcendent for $60, even if it is $60 rather
Is
than
that the
$5.
case? Is that the case though? Because you have like 20 people competing, and even if you're not a design expert, you're going to be gravitating toward the best design. You're going to be gravitating toward.
Yeah, you are, but like this, it might be being sold for $60, and just to be completely politically incorrect, the tallest midget syndrome starts to take effect. Instead of actually looking at what is the best possible solution, you're looking at the best of a selection of terrible solutions. And that's not to say, Joe, that your book cover was terrible or whatever the different solutions were that were mentioned. But my real gut response to this is that it's the beginning of the end for creativity, and that we're going to start to outsource it to machines in the not too distant future.
Well, I just want to push back a little bit, which is my cover is awesome. No, no, but I actually think what's also happening, it's just an interesting observation, is that there are many creatives who are on these platforms and are moonlighting or kind of gigging on the side, whether it's permitted or not inside their organizations, because they're not getting paid what they should, or just because they need or just want to make some extra. So there are these interesting avenues for creativity to flourish before the machines, ultimately take over. But, as I said, I go back to this idea in a free market economy, quite frankly, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, maybe this ad was a little insensitive because Fiverr outsourced it to someone on Fiverr.
Maybe it was. That's the one thing that struck me too. I didn't want to bring it up, but since you already have, it's if you're doing an ad for Fiverr, I mean, I guess you used Fiverr to do your ad, so it better be the darn best ad that came out of all the ad choices that were there.
Or someone at Gillette.
Or someone at Gillette. Well, anyway, it's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Dave Delaney. You can find him at futurefourth.com. That's the home of his consultancy. Tell us, Dave, what would you like to promote?
Thanks, Bob. I've got a little newsletter. It's a weekly email newsletter I send out every Friday. It's called The Nice Maker, and you can find it at nicemaker.co. Basically, I send a weekly roundup of links to interesting stories that I find, interesting tools, tips, things that I find online that are all sort of nice, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that isn't so nice online that we're facing constantly, and I'm a little tired of it all.
Okay, well, that sounds like a really interesting premise. We'll have to check that out. Next up, Colin Glaum. You can find him at cwhemp.com. That's the home of Charlotte's Web, a CBD manufacturer that is doing some amazing things with the part of the pot plant that you just don't think about. So tell us what's going on in your world, Colin. What would you like to promote?
Thanks, Bob. We're actually going to be doing an activation called Well House next weekend at Sundance. So if anyone on the audience has an opportunity to be in Park City, Utah next weekend, please stop by. We'd love to see you and educate you about all the benefits of CBD.
Awesome. And last but not least, Joseph Jaffe. You can find him at thehmsbeagle.com. That's the home of his consultancy he's doing with Lynn Power. Tell us, what would you like to promote?
Well, I'm getting dangerously close to being able to talk a little bit more, maybe a lot, about my new book, which I'm very, very excited about. First one in about 4 years, and before I do, all I want to do is say that I will be going to South by Southwest this year. It will kind of be the launch of the book. And so if you are planning on descending into Austin in March, please contact me, and let's get together and talk about Bob and the BeanCast.
I would love to. I would love to be talked about. I love the fact that people talk about me at South by Southwest. Still haven't been, but I love being talked about. As for me, more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and you can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, Ford, for quite a while, for I guess a couple of years now, was set to revolutionize mass transportation with their on-demand bus service called Chariot. Unfortunately, Joe, the public wasn't as keen on this idea. They pulled the plug on Chariot this week. After all that hype, after all that support, it's all gone. No more.
Your chariot does not await.
It does not. It does not.
I was going to insert chariots on fire, but
Or chariots, you're fired.
nice.
Speaking of being fired, a Japanese hotel that specializes in robotic attendance, Dave, is now laying off half of their 243 robots because, and I quote, they were causing more problems for guests than they were solving. So how does a hotel that is built around robotics end up getting rid of half the robots in the process and say, this isn't working? How do you continue to market yourself?
I don't know. It's just a big fat fail, in my opinion. It's just totally sad. I was really excited about the robots. Like that was a very exciting thing. But I guess, I'll just use my phone for everything.
Well, we've got a robot twofer in this week's AdFell 5. Giant Food Markets has deployed googly eye robots, Colin, in their stores to provide shopper assistance because crazy eyes really say, trust me. The images from this are hysterical because it's this big, tall robot that is totally impersonal, has no human features except for two giant googly eyes. Do you think that's enough to make people feel comfortable with this robot wandering through the aisles of your grocery store?
No, I can't imagine what it would look like if it was just like stalking you down an aisle, like asking you if you needed help and stuff like that. The only thing scarier in terms of a mascot that's been released this year is the Philadelphia Flyers mascot Gritty, which, if you haven't looked that up yet, it is literally a nightmare on skates.
But
so
everybody loves Gritty. Everybody loves Gritty, though. I mean, it's just insane. Like, let's face it.
I can say this because I'm a Philadelphia fan through and through. That is one of the most insane mascots ever released in any kind of history. But jump outside of sports, it's like it trumps every auto car dealership thing that you've ever seen in your entire life. It's quite remarkable.
Well, this googly eye robot thing, the only thing I can say is I hope it has a silly voice with it, like, how are you? Let me find that.
Clean up in aisle 3.
Let me find that peanut butter for you. Okay, we found out this week.
Or if it could do the yodeling boy type of impersonation, that would be awesome.
Maybe. We found out this week that Facebook is creating and testing a teen-based meme hub called LOL, Joe. So something else the Russians can exploit. I'm just thinking, am I wrong about this? That for a few months, all we've been talking about is how Facebook needs to get back to legitimate news and actually amp down on memes and that type of content. Yet that's what everybody's sharing, and they're going and building a whole platform to help teens do more of it.
I mean, there's so much to say, which is I think this ridiculous idea, LOL itself, should become a meme. But the reality is they should have probably called it WTF or OMFG, or most likely, I guess we're just looking at it with SMH.
I think
Look it up. Look it up.
And in a PR fail for the White House and a equally PR winning comment from Burger King, BK responded to the president's tweet about his fast food. I wrote something that I don't understand here, but his fast food banquet for Clemson, where he misspelled hamburgers. Okay, let me start over. Let me try this again. In a PR fail for the White House and a PR win for Burger King, BK responded to the president's tweet about his fast food banquet for Clemson, where he misspelled hamburgers, by using the tweet, due to a large order placed yesterday, we're all out of hamburgers, just serving hamburgers today.
Oh, that's genius.
I thought
this is the
was
best
great.
thing.
Yeah, that's genius.
I've never loved fast food so much as I do now that they have Twitter accounts and they're hiring comedians to write their tweets. It's amazing. The stuff that comes out of like so many of the fast food restaurants. So kudos to Burger King for that one.
I just love this whole story mainly because it gave us the image of Trump standing in front of a picture of Abraham Lincoln with a spread of hamburgers in front of him in the dining room with candlelight everywhere. It's the perfect Trump picture. I think that should be the picture that hangs up in every government office across the country, but that's just me, one man's opinion.
I hope they quietly put them down, like take all those photos down of you know who.
Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online, use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound AdFail and the number 5. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the listing on Apple Podcasts, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on Apple Podcasts. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.